Okay, everyone, so welcome. It's Amy Stapleton here from the Basel Communicators Network. I am sorry my video isn't showing. For some reason, the camera stopped working 5 minutes into the test that Markus and I were doing, so I'll have to fix that later. But as Markus was telling me, it's all part of being live and just getting on with the show. And so we are really thrilled to have him here today with us. Last year in 2019, he presented over 60 stand-up comedy shows on 4 continents. So we really have someone with us who is very experienced and runs here the comedy club in Basel. And other than that, it's over to you, Markus.
Thank you very much, Amy. And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this presentation from my series, Leadership Lessons from the Comedy Club. Like Amy said, my name is Markus Seppälä. I'm a comedian speaker based here in Basel. And I put together this workshop series where I've collected the things that I've learned performing stand-up comedy and kind of looking at the things that we as professional speakers, communicators can learn from the comedy stage. So that's the idea of this workshop series. And today I'm going to do for you one of the modules out of this series. But I'm not going to tell you which one. You guys are going to tell me which one. So I'm going to share my screen here again, and I will tell you that I will show you the menu. And this workshop series is something that I've learned from 3 different aspects of doing comedy. One is performing comedy on stage. The other one is hosting shows. The third one is producing shows. And I kind of put together some lessons from each of those. So the first one here on the screen, asking audience questions, that's from performing on stage. The second one is from hosting, warming up the audience, is from the hosting part. The third one, about planning a lineup, is more from the production side. And then there's the fourth one, the no excuses policy, which is a combination of all 4 actually, or 3 rather. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you in just 2 minutes to vote for one of these. And for this, we're going to have to raise your hand. So I'm going to ask you to put your camera on. But before you vote for one of them, I'm going to tell you a little bit of what's in them so you can make an informed decision. The first one is about audience interaction. How do you ask a question to the audience? Well, not like that. What I did there, I did everything wrong. I did not give you any clear instructions on how to answer the question. The question is super vague, and I would not have been able to do anything with the answer even if I got one. So this module is all about creating genuine audience interaction and cooperation, but still with you in control of the show. The second one about warming up the audience. We all produce different kind of content for our audience, and we want them to engage with the content. And it helps if they are warmed up. And in the Comedy Club, we have various techniques and tips and tools for warming up the audience. So in that module, I'm going to go through 3 techniques that I use myself that are going to warm up the audience and make it easier for them to engage and to do the thing that you want them to do. The third one is about planning a lineup. And when we put on a corporate event, there is some kind of objective that we want to achieve. And there is a way in which you can sort your speakers to achieve that objective. And so now in my case, it may be putting the comedians in a certain order. If you're doing a conference, it's putting the conference speakers in a certain order so that you have a natural flow of highs and lows in energy throughout the show. And then that last block, then number 4, the no excuses policy. I think we've all been to speeches and presentations where the speaker has started their speech with an excuse. Like, oh, I'm not a native speaker, or I'm sorry you can't see my slides, or even worse, they make an excuse for somebody else. It might be, oh, this next performer, he's really new. So that 4th block is all about getting rid of those excuses and look at what can we do instead to actively get rid of them. So with that, I would like to ask for your vote. And actually, I'm going to stop my screen sharing there, so just so I can see everybody's video. So everybody who wants to vote for item number 1, ask audience questions, please raise your hand.
Now, for those that can't be seen on camera, you can write your question, your choice into chat.
Shall we do it like this, Amy? You monitor the chat, I monitor the video.
Exactly, let's do that.
Okay, so so let's give everybody just 1 second to activate the video if they want. So the first, if you want to vote for asking audience questions, please raise your hand now. I see 1 person, 2 people for that. If you want to vote for warming up your audience, please raise your hand. I see approximately 4 for warming up the audience. For planning a lineup, please raise your hand. Nobody for planning a lineup. And the 4th one, the no excuses policy, please raise your hand.
I have my hand up for that one, Markus.
Okay.
And so there were 2 votes for the first 2 in the chat.
Okay, so to me it appears that warm up your audience is maybe the winner. I think that's the one that got the most raised hands. Would you agree, Amy?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to do warm up the audience. And for that, I'm going to just quickly go over to my notes, and then we do that. Warm up your audience. Okay. This is a good one. There's not going to be any slides. It's going to be me talking, me making funny faces and gestures like a proper comedian would. So this block is all about warming up your audience. And first I want to kind of think about the audience in different kinds of live entertainment. Because if I say to you, for example, that the audience in a comedy club is absolutely critical, you may think that, yeah, that's pretty obvious. That's the case for any kind of live entertainment. But is it really? If I look at different kinds of performing arts, for example, I'm at a concert, rock, rap, pop, whatever it may be. The audience, they should be there cheering, going crazy, singing along. But if I'm at the symphony, there's no singing along, right? If I'm in a sports event, I'm in an ice hockey game. Yeah, people want to cheer and go crazy. But if I'm watching a snooker game or billiards, pool, is not the case. So to me, it's interesting to look at what is the role of the audience in these kinds of forums. And when we look at corporate events, the role of the audience, you can discuss it. But at least you want the audience to do something. So you do want them to engage with your content. So we'll come back a little bit to those examples, but let's look at comedy first. When we have a comedy show, it's very clear what we want the audience to do. We want them to laugh. Very simple. And that also means that we have a very easy way of measuring success. There's a key performance indicator. It's very simple. Did people laugh or not? And we can even measure it. If you are a world-class comedian, like one of the best in the world, for every minute that you're on stage, you are going to get between 15 and 20 seconds of laughter. If you're at that level, you're a comedy god and you're fantastic. And the further down you go in the level of experience, people are going to get less laughs per minute. But that's a key performance indicator that we can actively measure. So that also means that everything we do to warm up the audience should help us in achieving that particular goal. But now let's look at your corporate events. You have some kind of outcome that you want people to do. Let's say that you're doing a training, for example. You want the people to engage with the content so that they go then and apply what they have learned in the training. If you have a strategy workshop for your executive team, you want them to apply the strategy in their work. On the other hand, if you just have a standard kind of quarterly update on things that are happening, and you don't want the people to do anything with the information, that could happen, then maybe you should check if it was a good idea to even have it. If you don't want people to do anything with the information, then I think it's a good idea to think about, is it worth having this event at all? So for the purposes of this, for this module, I'm going to assume that we do have a goal and we want people to engage with the content. And that could be also at the end of a conference, you may want them to sign up for something or do a survey or change their behavior, something like that. What I want to move on to next is a couple of examples of specific techniques that we do in the comedy club to warm up the audience. And the first one, the most traditional one, is crowd work. This is the little banter that we have at the top of the show. This is when we talk to the crowd and get them warmed up. And there are 3 specific techniques that we use. And the reason why I'm talking about this is that you can use them in a corporate setting as well. You can talk to the audience. You can do some of these things that I'm going to go through. So crowd work technique number 1 is a simple polling question. For example, you may ask somebody, who here is from out of town? Is anybody celebrating anything? Or give me a big cheer if you're Swiss. Easily applicable to the corporate stage as well, to get a feeling for who's in the audience. The second type of crowd work question, they are individual questions to individual audience members. So this could be, for example, there's a guy with a cool hat in the front row. I might ask him, hey, what's the story with that hat? When you put on that hat, what kind of superpowers does it give you? Where did you get it from? And how do you see your future with that hat? And these are a little bit nonsense questions, but they get people warmed up. That's the whole point. And here's the thing also, they're not the funniest questions, right? That's not the point. The point is to get the audience warmed up and loosen up a little bit. And then the third kind of crowd work is you just talk about the audience just based on how they are, what kind of groups they're in, and how they look. The first one, the one about polling, who's from Switzerland, that's easy. The middle one, second one about individual questions, that can be quite difficult. To just randomly make fun of audience members without talking to them, extremely difficult. Once again, you have to be one of the best comedians in the world to do this. Like there's an American comedian called Andrew Schultz, for example. He does this in an amazing way. He did a whole comedy special, just crowd work, no prepared material at all. Highly recommend. So those are the three typical structures for crowd work. And what I want to talk about is some of the benefits of doing this, and hopefully you will see that they are not applicable only to the comedy club, they also apply in a corporate setting. The first benefit of doing crowd work is that you get a feeling for the crowd. That example, for example, who here is from Switzerland? If I ask that question in one of my shows where there's 100 people there, I might only get 3 people, which means that I cannot use Swiss-based references. I cannot make jokes about different cantons, and it might impact the content. So it's a great way to relate better to the audience. For example, something that comes to mind now is that I was performing last November and December in Nairobi, Kenya. I changed my jokes because, of course, the socio-economical reality of the Kenyan audience is very different than what we have in Switzerland. There are certain jokes that just wouldn't work now. So relating better to the audience is a very important key benefit of crowd work. The second one is about risk-taking. And I mentioned before that these are not going to be the funniest jokes of the show, and that's key. The secret that nobody tells you about crowd work is that when I do it, when I'm hosting a show at the top of the show, when I do crowd work, the purpose is to make the other performers look great. This has two reasons. One is that all of the most of the laughter of the show is going to come at the end of the show because people are not ready to laugh at the very beginning. So when I'm making stupid jokes with the audience, I'm doing that to kind of sacrifice myself as the host because my joke as the host is to make the other performers look great. So it's a fun way to help the other performers. However, there is a third benefit because sometimes when you have these interactions with people, you have these moments of brilliance. It can happen every now and again that you get something spontaneous and something brilliant. And one key component of any humor is surprise. And there's nothing more surprising than a good crowd work bit that works because you know that cannot have been prepared. So you have this opportunity every now and again to create these moments of brilliance. And sometimes the biggest laughs that I've gotten throughout the whole show has been in the crowd work. The fourth benefit of doing crowd work is that it gives you and it gives the other performers material for callbacks. A callback is when you refer to something that happened earlier in the show. Either it happened earlier in your own set or it happened in somebody else's performance. And callbacks are an important humor technique because it triggers this recognition. Oh, that was the thing that he was talking about. Oh, he was talking about the same thing, but now in a different context. Callbacks are very powerful as a comedic tool. So when you are able to find out a little bit about the crowd, somebody might make a callback to the guy with the cool hat, or might make a callback to the fact that there are no Swiss people in the audience, whatever it may be. So a very powerful tool. And one example that comes to mind here, in 2018, I did my first TEDx talk, and I was talking about the value of failure, and I was talking about getting booed off comedy stages, and I was able to incorporate callbacks to 3 previous speakers. I was the last speaker. So I was able to have a couple of jokes about the other speakers, or referring to the other speakers, what they were saying, and also what the keynote speaker, the executive sponsor, had said as well. Very powerful because it creates that recognition, and recognition an important element of humor as well. Not only humor, actually audience engagement as a whole. The last benefit of doing crowd work is that it is a great leadership trait. When you're out there, you're talking to the crowd, you're chatting to them, you're making them feel good. That is a leadership trait. You are the host, you're welcoming them. You're making sure that they're warmed up, you're making sure that they're having fun, but at the same time you retain control. It's kind of, you know, welcome to my house, I'm the host, I'm going to make sure that you have a great time. So the fact that you can show a leadership trait by doing crowd work, I think is very important. Also extremely applicable to the corporate stage. So that's the little block that I wanted to do about crowd work per se, but I want to go through two other audience warm-up techniques that I use. And the first one is called talk to a stranger. Very often in my own shows, I will say something like that to the people at the start of the show. I might say, you're probably here with somebody who you know, but next to you is somebody who you don't know. What I'm going to ask you to do is turn around to that person, ask their name, and find out one funny thing about them. You have 2 minutes. And then I ask them to do it. And then when they come back, I might ask 1 or 2 or 3 of the pairs to present. What did you learn from the other person? And this talk to a stranger technique has some power as well. It allows everybody to say something, to get a little bit of energy going. And I remember the first time I tried that, I kind of hesitated. I thought, is anybody actually going to talk to a stranger? Everybody wants to talk to a stranger. I did the same topic at the TEDx event that I organized last year. I also had people talk to a stranger. There were 250 people in the audience, and everybody found somebody to talk to. Talk to a stranger is an important tool because it makes everybody feel included in the show, but in a limited way. Like, you know, when the instruction is you talk to this person 2 minutes, you know that it's going to be over. So you can be quite concise. The other thing that it does is that it builds trust. And this is something that I learned from my German teacher. My German teacher always at the start of the show, I'm always saying show. At the start of the lesson, he would ask us to pair up and just do an interview with the other person in German, and then ask to present. And this would take 5 or 10 minutes. And what he explained is that when you interview somebody else and you present them, that builds trust. And he was talking about a study where you had tried this interviewing somebody else or presenting yourself. And when you present somebody else, it makes you more open, it fosters cooperation. That's ultimately better for the German class. Same thing in your corporate event, in your training. If you have the opportunity to present somebody else, it makes you more humble and builds trust in the team. And trust is important for comedy. The last warm-up technique that I want to talk about is something that I call thought of the day. And this is something that I use when it's a smaller group, it's a project team meeting, for example, or even in my Toastmasters club, I use this. And thought of the day is very simple. Everybody around the table, let's say we have 20 people around the table. I'm going to ask them to say the following. Please say your name and share one thought of the day. You have 20 seconds. This is something that I do even if it's the 10th project team meeting, because this allows everybody to say something. If they're feeling bad, they can say, they can just share one thought of the day. I think it's very important in most meetings that everybody gets to say something. We've all been in those meetings where all the talking is being done by 1 or 2 people. And by doing thought of the day, by making sure that everybody says something at least once, I think it builds a very different kind of atmosphere. The other benefit of thought of the day is that it's an anti-hierarchy device, because everybody around the table, regardless of your rank, has to introduce themselves as if nobody knew who you were. And I think that's really good for pressing down the hierarchies as well. But it also has a very, very practical application. I think we've been to many situations where you kind of know 80% of the people in the room, but you're not really sure who the other people are. This forces everybody to introduce themselves, and nobody thinks they're more important than anybody else. So I think thought of the day is a great audience warm-up technique because it gets people talking, it gets rid of those hierarchies, and it kind of opens up. And that means that you can have a more productive meeting. It's more easy to engage with the people as well. So I talked a little bit about crowd work and talk to a stranger and thought of the day. And if you want to take away a simple lesson from this module, is that when you're hosting a meeting, when you're hosting a show, you should warm up the audience at the top of the show. But if you want to take away a more complex lesson, I have a reflection on that as well. Because it's obviously easy to think that the warming up the audience is the responsibility of the host, but in fact, everybody who's involved in an event can do this. And I'll tell you from my personal perspective, when I'm producing a show, I have many things to think about. I had to set up the cameras and the microphones and make sure the comedians are on time, make sure that they have drinks and food. And there's lots of things that I need to set up. I need to put up the chairs and the lights and all. And I'm usually quite stressed. And the last thing I want to do is talk to the audience before the show starts. But the best thing I can do is talk to the audience, because that's when the real engagement happens. Let's say that we have 100 seats, but there's only 20 people there who have arrived yet. If I talk to those people, those early arrivals, I can get some genuine engagement with them, and they're going to have a completely different experience. They're going to feel like VIP, and there's great value in that, even though I may be busy with other things. Same thing at the end of the show. All I want to do is make sure that my recordings were okay, put away my gear, pack away. And what I actually want to do is I want to hide in the back room. I don't want to talk to anybody because doing the show is such high energy. But the best thing I can do is talk to the crowd. That's when the real engagement happens. That's when I have the opportunity to sell tickets to the next show, give them a flyer, ask their feedback. You know, they're going to be in the best possible mood, and that's when I should engage with them. So how does that apply to the corporate stage? Same thing there. You want them to do something. You want them to sign up for a training. You want them to fill out a survey. You want them to buy a product. That's when you do it. So in those examples, I had the host and the producer engaging with the audience, but the performer can do it as well. They can do it before the show. They can do it afterwards. So the simple conclusion is that the host should warm up the audience, but the more profound conclusion is that warming up the audience is the job of everybody who's on that event, before, during, and after the show. That brings me a little bit to my conclusion. Let me just recap the main points. If you want to warm up the audience, if you want to engage the audience, and if you want the audience to engage with your content, it helps if they're warmed up. So we looked at 3 techniques. One of them is crowd work, the classic example from the comedy club. We have talked to a stranger, which includes everybody in the show. And we have thought of the day, this anti-hierarchy device for getting everybody around the table involved. And warming up the audience, if you look at it broadly, is everybody's responsibility. And everybody has an opportunity to warm up the audience, whatever they're doing on the stage. That brings me to the conclusion of this particular module. I'm going to go back to my screen here a little bit to just give me one moment. I'll sort that out. And then we're going to do a little bit more. Excellent. Okay. So if you do have any feedback, I'd be happy to take that now. But actually, now that I think of it, we could probably also do it at the end when we do the Q&A. Let me actually move on to something else as well. So what I talked about there was one of the techniques that I learned from the comedy club about warming up the audience. And as I mentioned, I developed this workshop from performing comedy, hosting comedy, and producing comedy shows. And this is what I just want to show you briefly on this particular slide, because this is kind of the full menu of the leadership lessons from the comedy club offering. So for example, as a performer, let me rephrase that. Each of these modules that I'm going to talk about, you can learn a very different skill. So for example, in the performing category, you can learn the value of being brief. You can learn how to deal with distractions. You can learn the value of showing vulnerability on stage, both for comedic purposes and also for engagement with the audience. And very practical things like how to use a microphone. That's more if we do this workshop face-to-face. In the hosting category, you can learn the value of setting the rules, also how to introduce a speaker. And that one actually even has some bonus content in there about how to handle it if you're introduced in a bad way. And also how to be the backup when something goes wrong. And in the producer category, you can learn how to collect useful feedback in maybe a new perspective, the value of taking care of your performers, and in general, how to run more fun meetings that are more inclusive and engaging. So each of these modules is, as you can hear, it's a very specific skill. And I dare to say that many of these skills are not something you can learn in a traditional presentation skills workshop. Because presentation skills workshops are usually about delivering a presentation, whereas these are things that you do to engage the audience. Some of these things you don't even do on stage, you do them before or after. So I like to think that this is a bit of a unique offer and a little bit of a different perspective. There is one secret bonus level to this as well, which I don't advertise publicly. It's more of a motivational speech, kind of self-development thing, more of me reflecting about what I've learned from doing stand-up. It relates to things like your perspective on failure, the question, are they laughing with you or at you? And what is the difference? The answer may surprise you. And also about the community of stand-up comedians, because I think there are many very special things about that community that maybe are useful to other ones as well. So here's your opportunity. If you would like to book this workshop with 1 or 2 or 3 of these modules, you can do so. And as you can see, I can deliver them online and also in person. Some of them are better in person than online, and because you have a little bit of interaction. So if you would like to know something more about this, I have my contact information here. So my name is Markus Seppälä. You can write to me at contact@markuspresents.com. Markuspresents.com is my website as well. Usually, I also run Comedy Basel. It's a little bit in lockdown now, but Comedy Basel is my show. And you can also reach out to me on all the social media platforms. I also actually put up quite a lot of content on YouTube these days as well.